is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have a
rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
Looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the CHIPS and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the elite. Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
and
they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm responding to the point you're raising,
okay,
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am. Why is half the country supporting him? Why is he beating you in a lot of swing states? Why, if he's as bad as you say, that half of this country is now supporting this person who could be the 47th president of the United States? Why is that happening?
This is an election for president of the United States. It's not supposed to be easy.
I know, but
it's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a cakewalk for anyone.
So are they misguided, the 50%?
Listen,
are they stupid? What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
We asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
So here are the former president's full comments on the enemy from within narrative, which Vice President Harris just referenced.
I wasn't unhinged. You know what they are? They're a party of sound bites. Somebody asked me, can they be brought together? You know, I never thought, really, I wasn't thinking like they could, because they're very, very different. And it is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous. They're Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick. I use a guy like Adam Schiff because they made up the Russia hoax. It took 2 years to solve the problem. Absolutely nothing was done wrong, et cetera, et cetera. They're dangerous for our country. We have China, we have Russia, we have all these countries. If you have a smart president, they can all be handled. The more difficult are, the Pelosi's, these people, they're so sick. and they're so evil. If they would spend their time trying to make America great again, it would be so easy to make this country great. But when I heard about that, they were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
All right.
They're the threat to democracy.
So comparing Nancy Pelosi to dictators, you have to take in what the vice president had to deal with there, because Claire McCaskill, your thoughts, it seems like whenever she brought up facts and backed up those facts that lead to a frightening point that Donald Trump is leaning very, very heavily toward fascism and talking about using the military against his own people and naming names. Anytime she tried to do that, Bret Baier would talk over her as if to try and prevent the viewers from hearing them. That was my take. How do you think the vice president did on Fox News yesterday?
Yeah, I think Bret Baier was rude. And it kind of surprised me how rude he was.
Yeah.
I've been interviewed by Bret Baier. I've been interviewed by Bret Baier. I understand that he comes at his interviews from a different perspective than maybe somebody who works at other news outlets, than one that has appointed itself as the defender-in-chief of Donald J. Trump. But I thought she did fine. Listen, was it a home run? No. Did she need it to be a home run? Absolutely not. The contrast that's getting set up here, Mika, is pretty clear. The person who is seen as strong typically wins the presidency. The person who is seen as stable and calm, and most importantly, change is very, very important. So she did some real work yesterday on the change stuff.
Yeah.
She, for the first time, said out loud, I am going to follow a different path than Joe Biden, which is very important for her to underline. I think she showed strength. And this contrast is now set up. You've got strength versus weakness. He's afraid to go anywhere where the person or the people that he's surrounded by are not his supporters. You've got calm and stable versus chaotic. You have change versus the same old tired circus act. And frankly, you have normal versus, sharks and Hannibal Lecter and Ave Maria and a playlist and dancing on stage for 40 minutes. This contrast is setting up nicely for Kamala Harris. And I think particularly sandwiched with 100 Republican leaders in Pennsylvania saying, hey, this isn't about what party you belong to. This is about our country.
George Conway, as always, there's so much to parse when Donald Trump speaks. The Russia hoax, that's become gospel in the MAGA world. Of course, if you read the Mueller report, it was not a hoax. There were a dozen, many instances of obstruction, and no question that Russia attempted to interfere in the 2016 election. The rhetoric about Nancy Pelosi, that's the kind of rhetoric that had a man arrive at her doorstep, break into her house looking for her, and beat her husband to within an inch of his life. He's recovered, thank goodness. But your impression of what we saw on Fox News in the interview with Bret Baier and Kamala Harris, again, is contrasted with what we see every day with Donald Trump.
Yeah, I thought she handled it masterfully. I mean, he was rude, but I don't necessarily mind journalists being rude and interrupting interviewees when they're not answering the question, but she was answering the question. And she, what she did quite well was to be able to turn the questions back on the questioner to make her point, which is something you want to do as a lawyer, and she's showing her skill as an advocate there. And I think the contrast between her not being coddled and being tough and being able to respond with substance and truth is a remarkable contrast with Donald Trump, who needs to be coddled. If he's not coddled, if he's interrupted, if he's contradicted, he begins to lose it. And he gets angry, and he says he's being persecuted, and he says it's being unfair. And the other thing about it is that she didn't attack the people who support Donald Trump. And she's trying to earn their votes. She went to, I had the pleasure and the honor of attending a rally yesterday in Pennsylvania, where she is seeking Republican votes from people, Republicans of good faith, who want to have actual civil discussions, factual discussions about the issues that face this country. And they don't want to hear about eating dogs and eating cats and how January 6th was a love fest and all these lies that Donald Trump just continually repeats, and that he's allowed to repeat on Fox News because there's never any contradictory. They sanitize the world for Donald Trump, and they sane wash Donald Trump, and they do their best to make him look normal. And that's why we live in these abnormal times. It's a malignant normality that outlets like Fox News, led by Donald Trump, has created in this country. And that's why half the people support Donald Trump.
Tom Nichols, you have a wonderful piece on George Washington that's still running in the Atlantic.com. And George Washington gave America many gifts at its inception all those years ago. But perhaps his biggest gift was he had the ability and the self-confidence to go home after serving 2 terms, to go home, to be a private citizen. So we've listened to a man who sat in the Oval Office, not only 4 or 5 years ago, Donald Trump. We just listened to him. And I'm wondering, as you listen to Donald Trump, as you watch this saga play out in an election that supposedly is neck and neck, close as it can be, how did we get here? How do we get to the point where basically, as George just pointed out, I mean, it's like a virus that has infected the population, the public population?
It's such a sad question because I think the answer is that over the past 30, 40 years, there are millions of people who just stopped taking elections seriously. There are millions of people who think that what they really want is to renew 4 years of the Donald Trump show. They know that he's unstable. They know that he's weird. They know that he's losing it. And that's part of his appeal to them, that he's interesting. It's fun. I think the other thing we really have to understand is that, we talk about polarization, but this is more than polarization. This is 60, 70 million people saying, the worse Donald Trump gets, the better, because when he's elected, that's really going to discomfort and aggravate and frighten the other 100 million people in America. Every time I look at this election, I think of the Trump voter some years ago who criticized Trump by saying he's not hurting the people he's supposed to be hurting. And once you start thinking that way about elections, you're not really thinking like an American. I thought the vice president handled that question about, why is this election so tight? I thought she handled that very deftly. Trump is the one who basically says, anybody who's not on my side is the enemy, is stupid, is a Marxist, is a communist, is a fascist, and many other words that he does not actually understand. But we got here in part because we've had it pretty good as a country for a long time. The end of the Cold War, affluence, people were able to treat elections as kind of big TV events. And Donald Trump, particularly because of having been on television so long, he was made for these times and for a certain kind of slice of the electorate who just want elections to be not boring and to be full of drama and weirdness. And I think that, unfortunately, is how we got here, because the presidency, the boring work of actually governing, is something that doesn't interest a whole lot of people in this country, unfortunately.
No, and the boring work of what it means protecting the right to be a free American citizen it's not something people should have to worry about.